Welcome to True Crime Threads, where every case we cover connects to a deeper, darker story. Today, we dive into the heartbreaking case of Judy Hurley, an elderly woman trying to escape, but never making it out alive. The morning was crisp, the air carrying the damp scent of the nearby river. Two hikers, a couple out for an early trek along the west bank of the Willamette River, had set out just after sunrise, enjoying the peaceful quiet of nature. The trail was mostly deserted at this hour, save for the distant sound of birds rustling through the branches overhead. It was supposed to be just another routine walk, a way to disconnect from the busy city life and breathe in the fresh air, but what they found that morning would haunt them forever. As they made their way along the path, something out of place caught their attention. A large navy blue suitcase, partially hidden in the underbrush just off the trail. At first glance, it seemed like an ordinary piece of abandoned luggage. Perhaps someone had dumped it there after realizing they no longer needed it. But something about the way it sat tilted slightly, as if hastily pushed into place, felt off. The hikers hesitated before stepping closer. A faint odor lingered in the air, something sickly sweet yet unmistakably wrong. One of them nudged the suitcase with the toe of their hiking boot. It was heavy, far too heavy for just clothing or personal belongings. A sinking feeling settled in their stomachs as they exchanged uneasy glances. With trembling hands, they reached for the zipper and slowly pulled it open. What they saw inside made them recoil in horror. The frail body of an elderly woman was crammed inside, her limbs bent unnaturally to fit within the confined space. Her skin was pale, almost wax-like, and her eyes were closed as if she had simply gone to sleep and never woken up. She was dressed in casual clothing, sweatpants, a sweater, and a thick pair of socks, as if she had once been in the comfort of her own home. But there was nothing peaceful about the way she had been left here, discarded like unwanted baggage. The hikers stumbled backward, their breath caught in their throats, before fumbling for their phones to call 911. Within minutes, police arrived, securing the area with yellow tape as forensic teams began their work. The woman was soon identified as 80-year-old Judy Hurley, a longtime Portland resident. Her disappearance had gone unnoticed, as she lived a quiet, isolated life with few close family members to check on her. But the circumstances of her death painted a much darker story. Who had placed her in the suitcase? How had she ended up by the river, so far from her home? And most importantly, had she died before or after being stuffed inside? Authorities quickly ruled out natural causes. Though the body showed no immediate signs of violence, the fact that she had been transported in such a manner made it clear someone had gone to great lengths to ensure she was never found. But why? Investigators knew they were dealing with something far more sinister than a tragic accident. Judy Hurley had once been a vibrant woman, known for her generosity and kindness within her small Portland community. Born in 1945, she had lived through decades of change, watching her neighborhood evolve around her. For years, she worked as a nurse, dedicating her life to caring for others. But as time passed and age caught up with her, Judy became more reclusive. After retiring, she lived alone in her modest home, relying on neighbors and acquaintances for occasional help with errands. She had no close family, no children to check in on her, and no one who truly knew the struggles she faced behind closed doors. Though she rarely left the house, Judy's home had become a revolving door for strangers, people who, over time, had begun to take advantage of her vulnerability. Some were acquaintances, individuals she had met through local community events, while others had simply appeared, staying for weeks at a time without any clear purpose. They would offer to run errands, bring groceries, or fix things around the house, but in reality they were slowly draining her of her financial stability and peace of mind. Neighbors had noticed the concerning pattern for months. Judy had once been independent, but now unfamiliar faces came and went from her property at all hours. Some stayed overnight, while others were seen carrying bags out of her home. People spoke in hushed tones about the drug activity rumored to be happening inside. Those who had once offered to check on her found it difficult to get inside. She was always surrounded by individuals who claimed they were taking care of her needs. One couple, Leslie Ortiz and Justin Misner, had met Judy in the spring of the previous year when they were considering buying her home. They recalled finding her in a heartbreaking state, frail and bedridden, with multiple strangers living in her house. The situation had shocked them. Judy's home, which should have been a safe haven, had been turned into a place where she was no longer in control. She confided in them, admitting that she wanted to leave, to sell her home and move to a retirement community. But the people around her made that impossible. They convinced her she was better off staying, all while continuing to use her money and resources. Financial records later revealed a disturbing trend. Large sums of money were being withdrawn from Judy's bank account in the months leading up to her death. Tens of thousands of dollars had vanished with no clear explanation. It was evident that Judy had been manipulated, possibly even threatened, to keep quiet. Investigators now had to determine who had the most to gain from her isolation. Had Judy realized too late that she was being exploited? Had she tried to escape? If so, who had stopped her? With her body found in such a horrific way, one thing was certain: whoever had been controlling her life had now taken it. As investigators worked through the details of Judy Hurley's life in the months leading up to her death, one name repeatedly surfaced: Michael Darwin Moody. Moody was a 54-year-old man with no fixed address, known for drifting between odd jobs and temporary housing situations. He had entered Judy's life under the pretense of being a caregiver, but there was little evidence to suggest he had been providing any real assistance. Instead, he had embedded himself into her daily routine, slowly gaining access to her finances and making himself indispensable. Neighbors had seen him around Judy's property frequently, sometimes carrying bags in and out of the house. He spoke politely to those who questioned his presence, always offering a reasonable excuse for why he was there. He claimed Judy trusted him, that she needed someone to help her with basic tasks. At first, his involvement seemed harmless, even beneficial, but as time went on, his control over Judy's life became more apparent. Surveillance footage from various ATMs in Portland showed Moody standing close behind Judy as she made large withdrawals. Sometimes he would be the one using the machine while Judy stood nearby, looking frail and confused. In several instances, Judy withdrew thousands of dollars in cash, only for the money to disappear without a trace. Investigators traced transactions from her bank account to purchases that didn't align with her usual spending habits: electronics, expensive meals, and even hotel stays. It became evident that someone was using Judy's money for their own benefit, and all signs pointed to Moody. Despite his presence in Judy's life, Moody had a murky past. His criminal record stretched back decades, with a history of fraud, theft, and exploitation of vulnerable individuals. He had been arrested multiple times, often for financially preying on the elderly. In one case, he had convinced an elderly woman to grant him power of attorney, only to drain her accounts before disappearing. He had a pattern, and Judy had become his latest victim. But the situation with Judy had taken a darker turn. Unlike his previous scams, this one had ended in murder. The forensic report revealed traces of a sedative in Judy's system, a drug commonly used to subdue patients in medical settings. Investigators suspected that Moody had been drugging Judy to keep her compliant while he continued to take advantage of her. But something must have gone wrong. Perhaps Judy had finally decided to fight back, to escape his control. Maybe she had threatened to go to the police or revoke his access to her finances. Whatever the case, Moody had chosen to silence her. The carefully concealed nature of her body suggested panic he hadn't planned for things to escalate this far. Instead of calling for help, he had taken matters into his own hands, stuffing her into a suitcase and discarding her like an object. Now, authorities had the evidence they needed. The case against Moody was growing stronger by the hour, but investigators still had one question left to answer. Had he acted alone? The forensic findings provided the first real breakthrough in Judy Hurley's case. The sedative in her system was a critical piece of evidence, proving that she had been drugged before her death. But the circumstances surrounding her final moments were still unclear. Had she been alive when she was placed in the suitcase? Had she been suffocated, restrained, or simply left there, unable to call for help? The medical examiner determined that while the sedative had likely incapacitated her, the exact cause of death was still uncertain. There were no signs of strangulation or blunt force trauma, but Judy's frail condition meant even a small amount of force or prolonged drugging could have led to her demise. Investigators intensified their focus on Michael Moody, determined to unravel the timeline of Judy's last days. Phone records placed him near Judy's home the night before her body was found, and security footage captured him at a gas station just a few miles from the Willamette River hours later. In the footage, he appeared alone, purchasing a roll of duct tape, cleaning supplies, and a bottle of water. While none of these items directly linked him to the crime, they painted a picture of someone preparing to cover their tracks. His background suggested he was no stranger to deception. Interviews with former associates revealed a disturbing pattern. He had a history of befriending elderly individuals, gaining their trust, and slowly taking control of their finances. In many cases, he left them in financial ruin before disappearing, moving to a new city and finding another vulnerable target. Judy was not the first, but she had become his first known murder victim. Detectives now believed Judy had realized what was happening and attempted to take back control. The large cash withdrawals in the weeks leading up to her death hinted that she may have been trying to liquidate her assets, possibly in preparation to leave. Maybe she had finally seen Moody for what he was, a predator. If she had confronted him, even in the smallest way, it might have set him off. But Moody wasn't the only person investigators were looking at. Evidence suggested that Judy had been surrounded by multiple individuals who had taken advantage of her. Police began questioning those who had lived in her home or spent significant time there, hoping to determine if Moody had acted alone. Some had criminal records, but none had as much to gain from her death as Moody did. Eventually, a witness came forward with a crucial piece of information. A neighbor reported seeing a dark-colored SUV parked outside Judy's home the night she vanished. The description matched a vehicle linked to Moody, further tying him to the crime. GPS data later confirmed that his phone had traveled from Judy's house to the riverbank where her body was found, following a direct route with no apparent detours. With this new evidence, authorities arrested Moody on charges of financial exploitation, abuse of a vulnerable person, and second-degree murder. He denied everything at first, claiming he had only tried to help Judy and that someone else must have been responsible. But as the weight of the evidence mounted, his story began to fall apart. Still, investigators couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. Moody may have been the one to carry out the crime, but had someone else put him up to it. The arrest of Michael Moody brought some relief to the community, but it didn't answer every question. Judy Hurley's case wasn't just about a single act of violence. It was a story of long-term neglect, manipulation, and the vulnerabilities that many elderly individuals face when they are isolated. Even as Moody sat in jail, the full extent of the exploitation she had endured remained unclear. How long had she been suffering in silence, and had others played a role in her downfall? Investigators continued to dig into Moody's past, searching for more victims. It quickly became clear that Judy wasn't his first target. Financial records showed a pattern stretching back years, with multiple elderly individuals reporting missing funds, sudden property transfers, and suspicious withdrawals that coincided with Moody's presence in their lives. While none of his previous crimes had escalated to murder, it was apparent that he had perfected a method of gaining trust and then stripping his victims of everything they had. Judy's story sent shockwaves through the community. Many neighbors who had once assumed that the people coming and going from her house were friends or caregivers now felt a deep sense of guilt. Some admitted they had noticed troubling signs, Judy looking thinner, her home falling into disrepair, strangers using her property for unknown reasons, but they hadn't known what to do. It was a harsh reminder of how easy it is for someone to fall through the cracks, even in a populated neighborhood. Beyond the local community, Judy's case highlighted a widespread issue: financial and physical abuse of the elderly. Advocacy groups seized on her story, using it as a call to action for stronger protections. Lawmakers in Oregon proposed new legislation aimed at preventing similar cases, including stricter background checks for caregivers and increased monitoring of financial transactions for seniors who may be at risk. While these changes wouldn't bring Judy back, they offered some hope that her death would not be in vain. Meanwhile, prosecutors built their case against Moody, determined to ensure that he would never have the opportunity to hurt another vulnerable person again. His trial revealed chilling details. Witnesses described how he had manipulated Judy, isolating her from anyone who might have helped her escape his grasp. Text messages showed that he had been growing desperate in the weeks before her death, possibly fearing that his access to her money was coming to an end. It became clear that Judy had in some way resisted him, and for that, she had paid the ultimate price. In the end, Moody was convicted of multiple charges, including financial exploitation, abuse, and second-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison, ensuring that he would never have the chance to victimize another elderly person again. Judy's case served as a tragic but powerful reminder predators don't always come in the form of strangers lurking in the dark. Sometimes they come disguised as helpers, hiding in plain sight, and without vigilance, they can take everything before anyone even notices they were there.